Welcome to the Test Delivery System TDS Overview Training Module. In this training module on the Test Delivery System, or TDS, we will cover the basics of online administration of the ELPA 21 screener. Please note that the example images shown in this training module may vary slightly from your state system. In this training module, we'll discuss the Test Delivery System, or TDS, which includes the student interface used by students to navigate through the test, and the test administrator interface used by TAs to manage test sessions and monitor student testing progress. After viewing this presentation, you should be able to use the test administrator interface to start and run a test session, view student test settings and accessibility resources, monitor the testing process, pause and stop a test session, print test session information, and exit and log out of the test administrator interface. Students must use the secure browser to take the screener online.
This slide has been updated with Oregon-specific information. All students taking the screener must be added to TIDE in advance of being administered the screener. If your student is already listed with an SSID in TIDE, then they are ready to take the screener. Otherwise, they must be added. If the student does not yet have a permanent SSID and needs to take the screener immediately, then they must be added to TIDE manually using an automatically assigned temporary ID. In Oregon, all roles have permissions to create temp IDs. Also note that only users with certain permissions may add students to TIDE. For information on specific user roles and permissions, see your TIDE user guide. Additionally, students with domain exemptions must have those exemptions set in TIDE prior to testing.
Students who require a domain exemption must have that domain exemption recorded in TIDE prior to testing. If no domain exemption appears in TIDE, then all domains will be scored for the student even if no questions are answered. Contact your state administrator for clarification on how to determine and record domain exemptions in TIDE in your state. Note: students with one or more domain exemptions programmed in TIDE will be automatically administered both Steps 2 and 3 of the online screener. Completing Steps 2 and 3 will be explained later in this presentation. To log in to the TA interface, go to your portal. Click the appropriate user role card. On the next page, click the system card used for operational test administration. Enter your username and password, and then click Secure Login to continue. Once the test administrator has logged in according to the directions on the previous slide, he or she will see the test administrator interface with the test selection window open by default. From the test administrator interface, you can access the features you need to create and manage test sessions, look up students, and access help information. We will begin with an overview of the interface. The first step in administering a test is to create a test session. This should be done less than 20 minutes prior to starting the test in order to prevent the system from timing out. The list of students in the session will generate automatically when the students log into the session. You create test sessions in the test selection window that appears when you log in. You can click the plus sign button next to a category name to view the tests in that category. To create a test session, click one or more tests to administer. You may click the checkbox next to a category to select all available tests listed in that category for all grade levels. This would be useful if you are going to administer tests to students enrolled in different grades. Students will only have access to the tests you select for them that they are eligible to take. Note that the screener test will also be available for the TA to select when the TA sets up a test session for operational tests.
This slide has been updated with Oregon-specific information. When you click a plus sign, the category expands to show you all the tests in that category. The future kindergarten designation is an indicator that these students are entering kindergarten. If you are unsure whether to administer a kindergarten screener or a future K screener test to an incoming kindergartner, contact your DTC or state administrator before testing. You can create a test session that includes more than one grade or grade band, or includes all grade bands. If you aren't sure which grade band you need to administer, you can select all grade bands. Selecting all grade bands will allow a newly arrived student to take the appropriate test for their grade based on their record and TIDE. Remember to adhere to the screener's one-to-one test administration rules for Practice Step 1 and the first portion of Step 2, as found in the Screener Administration Manual. Once you select your tests, the Start Session button in the lower left corner of the window activates. Click the Start Session button. The system will automatically generate a session ID. This ID must be provided to students in order for them to log in. The test administrator may write it on the board or provide it to students using a printed card or similar method. If you do provide students with the information on paper, be sure to collect and destroy it when the session is complete. You should also note the session ID for your own records. If you are involuntarily logged out of the session due to an inactivity timeout or other event, entering the session ID will allow you to resume the session. If you do not have this information when you try to resume, you will be unable to do so.
When a user first logs in to the Test Administrator interface, the test selection window appears automatically. This window closes when the test administrator starts the session. After starting a session, the session ID appears at the top of the Test Administrator interface along with a Stop button. When students start signing into the test session, an Approvals button also appears next to the session ID. Once the test administrator approves students for testing, the test session table appears in the center of the Test Administrator interface, displaying students' testing progress. Additional features are available in the banner at the top of the screen. In the banner at the top of the screen, you will see a set of buttons and your username. You can click Student Lookup to search for student login information and verify that the student's login credentials are correct. Click Approve Requests to view a list of student print requests that you approved during the session. Click Print Session to print a screenshot of the TA interface. Click Help Guide to access additional information about the TA interface. Click Alerts to view messages sent by your State Department of Education. Click the Logout button when you want to exit the TA interface. If a student is having trouble logging in, use the Student Lookup feature to verify that the student's login credentials are correct. You can use either the Quick Search or Advanced Search option to view the information entered for the student in TIDE. With Quick Search, you simply enter the student's state-assigned student ID and click the Submit SSID button. Advanced Search allows you to narrow your search using several filters, including district, school, grade, and first and last name. When using either Quick Search or Advanced Search, if the search results in matches, the information will appear in the bottom of the window. If there is no match, you will see an error message. If you see the student you are looking for, click the I button next to the student's name. A new window displaying the student's information will display. Note that the information displayed may vary slightly from what is shown here. On the next few slides, we will look at what students see when they log in to take a test. To log into the online testing system using the secure browser, students must enter 3 pieces of identifying information: their first name, their SSID, and the current session ID. Only the session ID is unique for each test administration and each proctor, so this is the only information that will change through the test window. TIDE allows teachers to print out students' information on test tickets so students can log into the online testing system without needing to memorize their SSID number. When entries are complete, students will click the Sign In button to log into the test. The test administrator may assist students with logging in if necessary. The session ID is generated when the test administrator creates the test session. It needs to be given to students by the test administrator when it is time for them to log into the test. Session IDs should not be generated more than 20 minutes before students are ready to log in. If a student is having difficulty logging in, An error message and code will display on the login screen. The most common errors occur when the student's first name and SSID do not match what is in the system, and when SSIDs are entered incorrectly. If the student receives an error message indicating that he or she has entered incorrect information in the first name or SSID fields, the TA should use the Student Lookup tool in the TA interface to verify the student's information. Another common error occurs when the students enter an incorrect session ID. If a student receives the message, "The session is not available for testing," verify that the session ID was entered correctly with no extra spaces or characters. The session ID can be found in the TA interface. If a student receives the error message, "Session has expired," ensure that the student has entered the correct session ID for the current session. If the student has entered the session ID correctly, use the TA interface to verify that your session is still open. After logging in, students need to complete a few more steps before they begin testing. Students will be asked to view and verify their personal information. If their information is correct, students should click Yes to proceed. If their information is incorrect, they should click No to return to the login page. Test administrators must then contact their building or district test coordinator to have the student's information updated in Tide before the student attempts to log in again. On the Your Test screen, students will see their assigned tests for this test session. If the test displayed is incorrect or the expected test is not listed, students should click the Back to Login button to return to the login page and consult the test administrator to resolve the issue. If a test has already been completed, the test selection button will be grayed out. If there are no errors, students should select the correct test and wait for test administrator approval to proceed. Once students select a test to take, they must wait to be approved by their TA. Let's return to the Test Administrator interface, which shows all students in the session who are ready to start their test. Once the test administrator starts the test session and students log in, he or she must approve students' test settings before they can access their tests. It is very important to pay close attention to the test name prior to approving to be sure that students selected the appropriate test. You can do this by clicking the Approvals button. A list of students will display, organized by test name. The test administrator should review the list to make sure that all students chose the correct content area and test. The test administrator should also ensure that all student settings are correct. This is done using the I button in the See Details column. See the Tide User Guide for more information about test settings. If no changes are needed, click the green check mark next to a student's name to approve that student. Click Approve All Students to admit all students to the test session. If a student selected an incorrect test, you must deny that student entry to the test session by clicking the X button in the Action column. When you click the I button, a pop-up window will appear that allows you to verify that the student has the correct test settings and make changes to them if necessary. See the Tide User Guide for more information about test settings. Once you have confirmed that the student's test settings are correct, click Set to save changes and return to the main Approvals window, or click Set and Approve to save changes and approve the student's entry into the test session. If no changes are needed, click the green check mark next to a student's name to approve that student. Click Approve All Students to admit all students to the test session. If a student selected an incorrect test, you must deny that student entry to the test session by clicking the X button in the Action column. Although you can approve all students at the same time, students must be individually denied entry into the test session. The test administrator should deny students entry into the session in these circumstances. The student is not supposed to enter the session, the student's demographic information is incorrect, or the student's required accommodations appear to be incorrect and the TA needs to gather more information. Denying the student entry into the test session will not prevent other approved students from beginning their tests. If the student's test settings are incorrect, the settings can be updated in Tide or in the TA interface before the student takes the test. Note that no settings can be changed while the student is actively testing. The student must pause the test and log out if it is necessary to change the student's test settings. Once the student is no longer actively testing, the student's test settings can be updated in Tide. After verifying the test audio is functioning, students taking screener tests will need to verify their recording devices are functioning as well. First, they should click the microphone icon on this screen. After clicking the microphone button, the icon will be replaced with a stop button. Students should say their name into their microphones and then click the stop button. When students click the stop button, the icon below the microphone will be replaced with a green play button. Students should click the play button to hear their recording. If students clearly hear their names, they should click the I heard my recording button to proceed to the test. If audio is not clear, students should click the I did not hear my recording button and receive a message advising them to tell the TA about the microphone problem. From there, they can click Try Again to record an audio sample again. Click Select New Recording Device to try recording using a different attached audio device, or click Log Out to leave the test and work with the test administrator to adjust their microphone settings. TAs are permitted to assist students with test navigation, including these record and playback buttons, throughout the test. Be sure that all students taking screener tests have headphones and microphones. Preferably, students will be equipped with headsets that have built-in microphones. After selecting a test requiring audio, students will see an audio playback check screen. They will be prompted to click the sound icon and indicate whether the sound was audible by choosing either the I heard the sound or I did not hear the sound button. If students click I heard the sound, they will be able to click Continue and proceed to the next screen. If they click I did not hear the sound, they will receive a message advising them to tell the test administrator that they are having an audio problem. From there, they can click Try Again to listen to the sample audio again, or click Log Out to leave the test and work with the test administrator to adjust their audio settings. After confirming that their recording devices are working, students will see the Instructions and Help screen. When students click Begin Test Now, they will proceed to the first question on the first part of the test. Students are now presented with the first item of the screener. The screener is divided into 3 steps. The first part, Practice Step 1, consists entirely of unscored items which are marked Practice and are intended to help students get accustomed to the format of the test. During Practice Step 1 and at the start of Step 2, the TA should be seated adjacent to the student at the student's computer. These sections of the test are administered one-to-one. No other students should be in the testing room as this is a secure testing environment. At the end of Practice Step 1, the test administrator will be presented with the pictured screen. The TA will respond to 2 questions on this screen regarding the participation of the student and, if continuing to Step 2, whether the student will work independently or not once the first operational task set is administered to the student and scored by the TA. A response is required. The options are as follows. A. Student engaged with at least one practice question in Step 1. B. Student engaged with at least one practice question, but in a language other than English. C. Student engaged with at least one practice question, but only non-verbally. D. Student did not engage with any practice questions in Step 1. Participation is defined as having responded to or engaged with Step 1 on at least one practice question during this step. If the TA chooses either option A, B, or C, the student will continue on to Step 2. The TA must also respond to the TA assistance question. If the student is able to work with the technology independently, type independently in the text box. If the student will need one-to-one assistance with the technology for the remainder of the test, type with TA assistance in the text box. Choosing option D ends the test for the student. The test will not continue because the student did not participate by responding to at least one practice Step 1 question. Response modes during this step could include verbalizing, nodding when presented with an option, pointing, or using the mouse, him or herself, to indicate a response to at least one of the practice questions. After selecting response D, the TA can provide more detail about this behavior and participation during practice Step 1. If the TA chooses option D, student did not engage with any practice questions in Step 1, a second screen will appear after option D is selected that will ask the TA to briefly describe the circumstances that ended the test for the student. The test will then end and the student will receive a non-participant individual student report. If option D was chosen in error, a test reset and tide will be needed for the student to continue the screening session. If the TA chose option D in error, a test reset will be needed for the student to continue the screener session. If this occurs, please exit the test and create a reset appeal request in TIDE. For information about creating appeals, see the TIDE user guide. If the TA chooses option D, student did not engage with any practice questions in Step 1, a second screen will appear after option D is selected that will ask the TA to briefly describe the circumstances that ended the test for the student. The test will then end and the student will receive a non-participant individual student report. If option D was chosen in error, a test reset and tide will be needed for the student to continue the screening session. If the TA chose option D in error, a test reset will be needed for the student to continue the screener session. If this occurs, please exit the test and create a reset appeal request in TIDE. For information about creating appeals, see the TIDE user guide. If the TA chooses to end the student's test after practice Step 1, they will be asked to click the End Test button to finish testing. A "Congratulations, you reached the end of the test" screen will appear. If the TA chooses to continue the student's test, the student will be presented with the first question of Step 2. Step 2 is administered under secure testing conditions with only the student choosing responses to test questions. The first questions in Step 2 are 4 operational speaking items. This task is administered one-to-one, and the TA can take notes on the notes sheet and score on the fly while the student is recording. After the 4 speaking items are administered, and the student has been given a chance to review his or her recordings, the student will be presented with a screen instructing him or her to give the computer to the test administrator. The TA will then provide the student with a small enrichment task and will have the student turn away from the screener. The TA will then score the 4 speaking items with the provided rubric and then enter the student's score on each item directly into the computer. The TA will score the speaking items using the scoring shell shown on this screen. The 4 speaking items must be scored immediately by the TA. The computer will not move past the scoring screens until a score for each speaking item has been entered. A rubric and guidance documents will be available on your state's testing portal for this section of the test. Once the scores are entered and the TA clicks Next, there will be a screen instructing the TA to give the computer back to the student. Once this occurs, the responses and the scores for the 4 speaking items cannot be changed. Once the TA has given the computer back to the student will be presented with a question. This section of Step 2 consists of machine-scored operational items from the reading, writing, and listening domains. This is also the point where the student may work on his or her own if the TA had previously determined that the student had sufficient technology skills to work independently. If yes, the TA may step away and allow the student to continue working. If not, the TA will stay seated adjacent to the student and assist with technology. At the end of Step 2, after the student has been given the opportunity to review his or her responses to the machine-scored items, the testing system will determine if the student goes on to Step 3. The test automatically ends at Step 2 if the student will not be continuing. This is determined by the number of points the student obtained in Step 2. Students who aren't continuing will see a "Congratulations, you've reached the end of the test" screen, and the testing session will end. For the students for whom the computer has determined that they will continue to Step 3, the computer will present a new test question after the student has reviewed his or her responses to the machine-scored items in Step 2. Once this happens, the student cannot go back to Step 2 to modify any responses. Step 3 consists of operational items from all 4 domains. There are no further stopping points prior to the end of the test. At the end of Step 3, the student will have an opportunity to review the Step 3 responses. Once completed, the student will click the End Test button and the test will be submitted.
Now we will review how students navigate the student interface and use test tools. The global menu appears at the top of the student interface. The left side of the menu contains navigation buttons that students use to advance through the test. All students can navigate between pages using the back and next arrow buttons. Students can also navigate between items using the Questions drop-down menu located above the navigation buttons. The Save button ensures a response is committed. However, the Save button is not required to save an item. Other actions, such as moving forward to the next question, will also save the response. The Pause button pauses a student's test and logs the student out of the student interface. We will discuss how pausing works in more detail later in this presentation. Test tools can be found on the right side of the menu. The masking tool, when it is available, allows students to cover an area of the item so that they can focus on certain item elements. The Notes tool brings up an online notepad that students can use to type notes while testing. Students use the Zoom Out and Zoom In buttons on the right side of the menu to decrease and increase the size of text and graphics on the page. For more information on managing test settings and accessibility resources in Tide, refer to the Tide User Guide. For a detailed list of all available test tools and accommodations, including non-embedded accommodations, please consult the Accessibility and Accommodations Manual on your state's portal. Finally, students can access the test instructions and help page at any time by clicking the question mark in the upper right corner of the toolbar.
Students will encounter several types of items during testing. They must answer each item before proceeding to the next one. To answer selected response items, students must click the desired answer option so that the letter A, B, C, or D becomes shaded. For interactive items, students need to follow the instructions given to know how to indicate their answer. For example, students may be told to click an object to identify the appropriate answer, drag pictures or words in a table, or click on a keypad. If they wish, students may click the Save button while working on interactive items to save their work. Regardless of whether they click Save or not, their answers will save automatically when they navigate to the next part of the test. After answering all items on a page, students will click Next to go on. Be sure that the student is familiar with vertical and horizontal scrolling, as some response options may extend off the screen and some stories extend below the screen.
Many test items contain one or more audio clips. The audio will automatically play once the page with the item or stimulus loads. Students can pause the audio or replay the audio clip by clicking the corresponding button. Note that only one audio clip can play at a time. In order to play a different clip, students must pause the clip that is currently playing. The process for recording a speaking response mirrors the steps the student takes during the microphone check process. Press the microphone to start recording. Click the Stop button when finished speaking. Click the green Play button to listen to the response. If needed, click the microphone again to record the speaking response. If students re-record, their previous recording will be deleted. It is not possible to add to a recording after the student stops recording. If the student wants to add additional information, the student must start over and record the entire response from the beginning. Some test items and stimuli contain context menus. Students may use context menus to mark items for review, view item tutorials explaining how a particular item type works, and access additional test features. To flag an item for later review, students select Mark for Review in the Context menu. After marking an item for review, the drop-down navigation menu will show Marked next to the item number. Additionally, the item number at the upper left of the item will appear with a folded corner and a small flag icon.
To get more information about a particular item type, students can select Tutorial from the Context menu. A pop-up message will appear that shows how that type of item works. For example, whether they should select an answer, drag and drop answers, or type a response in an answer space.
This slide has been updated with Oregon-specific information. As a security measure, after 20 minutes of test inactivity, students are logged out, and their tests are paused automatically. Inactivity is determined by whether or not the student is interacting with the test by selecting answers or using navigation tools. Students will receive a warning message prior to being logged out and must click OK on the pop-up message within 30 seconds in order to avoid automatic logout and pausing of their test. If a student's test is paused, the student can log back in at a later time to resume testing and change answers. However, note that paused tests are automatically submitted at the end of 7 days. If a student's test is auto-submitted before the student has finished it, then an appeal will need to be created in TIDE for that test to be reopened. For information about creating appeals, see the TIDE user guide.
At the end of Step 3, the End Test button will appear in the upper left section of the screen, along with a message advising them that the test has been completed and is ready to be submitted. If students click the Next button at this point, they will see a pop-up message advising them to click the End Test button when they have completed reviewing their answers. They may also click the Back button to go back and revisit previous items. When students are ready to end the test, they should click the End Test button. A pop-up message will appear allowing them to select Yes if they are ready to finish the test and No if they are not. If students select No, they will return to the last item of the test and can revisit previous items. If students click Yes, they will be taken to the review screen, as shown on the next slide. From this review screen, students have the choice to review their answers or submit the test. Students who are ready to submit their test should click Submit Test to finish.
They will receive a confirmation pop-up message asking if they are sure they want to submit. Clicking No will return them to the review screen. Clicking Yes will take them to the end screen, which shows a message indicating that the test was successfully submitted and advising the student to log out.
While students are taking their test administrator can monitor their status from this screen. A table shows each student's name, SSID, opportunity number, test name, requests, student status, test settings, and a pause test option. The test settings column will display either standard or custom. This column displays custom when a student's test settings are different from the default settings for that test. Click the I button to view a student's test settings. The test status column indicates the student's progress through the items in the test. It shows the total number of items completed thus far and the total number of items in the test. If you wish to print a snapshot of the Test Administrator interface in its current view, click the Print Session button. This can be useful for tracking which students did not complete their test and may need to be scheduled for another test session. It may be necessary to set the page layout to landscape or adjust the margins in the print preview screen in order for the list to fit on the page. Remember that any printouts containing personally identifiable student information must be securely stored and should be destroyed after use. To pause an individual student's test, click the Pause button on the monitoring screen for that student. When prompted, click OK to confirm that you want to pause the test. This option would be appropriate if a student becomes ill, for example. In the event of an emergency that requires all students to stop testing, the test administrator can pause all students' tests by stopping the session. If you stop the session, all in-progress tests will be paused. If a session stops, it cannot be resumed. The test administrator will have to create a new session and give the new session ID to students so that they can resume testing. To stop the entire test session for all students, click the Stop button in the upper right corner of the screen. A pop-up message will appear requesting verification to end the session and log students out. Click OK to continue. If you forget to log out before leaving the testing area, the session will close automatically after 30 minutes of inactivity on both the test administrator and student computers. The test administrator would then need to create a new session and provide the new session ID to students in order to resume testing. Be aware that in some states, paused tests are automatically submitted after 3 days. If a student's test is auto-submitted before the student has finished, then an appeal will need to be created in TIDE for that test to be reopened. For information about creating appeals, see the TIDE user guide. This slide lists some differences between the pause and stop functions. Note that if you stop an entire test session, you will need to start a new session and students will need to log back in again in order to resume testing. When the system detects that a student is no longer in a test session, an information icon will appear in the Pause Test column for that student. Click the I button to view a description of the student's status, including why the student is no longer in the test session. This information can help you diagnose why a student has unexpectedly left a test session. The information that appears will tell you whether a student's test has been paused due to the student clicking the pause button, a session timeout, or some other reason. For a full list of status descriptions that can appear during a test session, please consult the TA user guide. To log out of the Test Administrator interface, click the Logout button in the upper right corner of the screen. It is preferable to log out only after stopping your active test session, as logging out will cause all in-progress tests to be paused. A confirmation message will appear asking you to confirm that you want to exit the site and pause all students' in-progress tests. This scenario also occurs when you navigate to another site from the Test Administrator interface. However, regardless of when or how you log out or navigate away from the Test Administrator interface, student data will not be lost. If the Test Administrator needs to access another application, we recommend opening it in a separate browser window. Click Yes to proceed. This table presents some of the common issues that test administrators or students may encounter during a test session. Please take a moment to review this information. For more detailed information and additional technical tips, please refer to the Test Administration Manual and the Technical Specifications Manual for online testing. Thank you for viewing this training module. If you need additional information, please visit your state portal where you can find announcements and copies of the Test Administrator User Guide. For further assistance, please consult your help desk.